afternoon. Happy New Year. Dumelang, sawubona, goeiemiddag. I think it is goeiemiddag. Welcome to Coffee Chat, compliments of the new year. It's our first one of the year. I hope you guys are well rested. I think most of you are back to work, getting things going. And just welcome all around. To those of you who do not know, this is Coffee Chat brought to you by the SA Property Investors Network. And who are we? Well, it is simple. We are a network of like-minded individuals who either want to help you start or grow your property portfolio. It is that simple. We are a huge and arguably one of the biggest property networking companies in the country. And we are just here feeding people information because we want to remove the veil of property investment. And so we want to make it applicable to everybody. However, for those of you who do not know, my name is Khali Maswani, and I'm going to be your host for this hour. Now, today we're talking about something that a lot of people kind of feel is far removed, especially people who are starting out in property, right? And that is student accommodation. Yeah. It's one of the more aggressive strategies. It is a bit high risk, but also there is high rewards. And as always, I bring to you seasoned investors to discuss student accommodation, and that is Kanya, Ngonyama, and Mohamed, Gardee, who are going to be joining us just a little bit later, while we're going to be talking about student accommodation and all that it encompasses, right? And I think a lot of people always assume when you start with student accommodation, you need to go big and have like 100, 200 beds. You can start a student accommodation with something as little as a 2-bedroom apartment, right? A normal standard, if it's close enough and it has all the amenities and the requirements that are necessary, that could be your startup of student accommodation. So it's not so far removed from you, my fellow investors. But as we're starting off the year, I'd like to, get a refresher for all the new people, and also all these, I want you guys to say hello and tell me where you're watching us from. I always love to see where in the world you guys are watching us from, and you can do that in the chat box as we're going to be talking. And as always, you can absolutely ask our guests some questions, and this is one of the few times you'll be able to actually be in contact with such high and esteemed investors, because they're very busy people. But before we get started, I would like to talk about our events and all the things we have planned for this year. January, we're probably towards the end, more so towards the end than the middle, but we actually still have quite a few things. I mentioned last year, if you watched, that we're going to be having workshops all over the country. We're having quite just a few in each country, so we can actually serve quality and teach people properly. So we're going to be having a preview in Johannesburg and also in Pretoria. So all of our Pretorians, we're definitely going to be showing you love this weekend. So you guys can actually get to see that part of me. We are going to be having a workshop. There's quite a few tickets. There's actually very few tickets left for the upcoming workshop that is happening this week. And that is 2 full days. Yes. Ladies and gentlemen, it is 2 full days. You can't just come for 1 day. And it is jam-packed with strategies, with how to raise finance and all the things that encompass property. So if you still want to get your ticket, please go onto our website. The link is in the chat box. Next, we're going to be having Investor of the Year. Investor of the Year. We have launched. Our website is up and running. Ticket sales are going out. Nominations are happening. So please, guys, invest in the Investor of the Year award. I need you guys to enter. And as always, there is 10 categories now. So you have no excuse. Standard is the beginner, the most growth, and the big leagues. So you could have a bachelor apartment that you bought and it is your first property. You are eligible to enter Investor of the Year award. And if you are a big guy and you think, well, I don't want to be unfair and I don't want to enter with people who still have smaller portfolios, sir, there is a category for you, or ma'am, there is a category for you. And if you had rapid growth, you can also enter most growth. So those are the 3 main categories, and then we have subcategories. So you have no excuse. So guys, the link is in the chat box. Please enter Investor of the Year award. It is going to be phenomenal. It is bigger. It is better. It is at a gorgeous venue in Houghton. So I cannot wait to see you there. And as always, we're going to be having a few more events that are happening. All of that is happening in the chat box. We have Poverty. She's saying, hello, Kay, watching you from the road in the Free State. I hope FS means Free State. If it means something else, I'm sorry. But lovely to see you and to meet you. But as I said, just let me know where you guys are chatting from us, where you guys are chatting to us from. So if you're from the Free State, from Bloemfontein, anywhere in the world, just let us know. Now, let's get back to business and the reason why you guys watch coffee chat, and that's for information, that's for knowledge, and that is for your ability to actually hone in the things that we give you. So I'm going to want you guys to give a huge genuine shout out. Just clap your hands to send the thumbs up in the chat box, and that is for our guests for this afternoon. Please, ladies and gentlemen, help me welcome Mohamed, Gardee, and Kanya Ngonyama. How are you, gentlemen?
We are fine. I'm fine, Khali.
Fantastic, Kanya. Okay, and we're still waiting for Mohamed, who's also still joining. But as he joins us, we can get started with Kanya. We always have just a few questions that we'd like to start off with, and usually that's when some of the questions go into the chat box. But I think what the people want to know, and I feel like your bio is so phenomenal, if you would just let us know, who is Kanya Ngonyama?
Thank you. Yes. Yes, Kanya Ngonyama is a property investor, but at the same time also a water and environmental scientist with a love for nature and at the same time a love for animals. But at the same time, besides being a scientist, also have a love for property. Hence, I got into property investing.
So, Kanya, we know that you're extensive in terms of property investment, and I don't want to say niche because I don't want to bottle you, but kind of like your strategy is student accommodation. So I think the main thing, as I mentioned earlier, is that people are sometimes, for lack of a better term, a bit risk adverse when it comes to student accommodation, or a bit scared or cautious because they feel like it's, students, they can get rowdy, they can get, all over the place. So with you, like, how did you get started in student accommodation?
Yes. How I started was initially when I was attending many property seminars when I was working as a scientist. And then I thought that the way to go is to buy sectional title units, whereby I was investing in sectional title units in different places. But then I found that that strategy requires quite a lot of management, and also the ROI, or the return on investment, is not as great compared to going into multi-lets. Hence, I thought, let me do multi-let investing, and then in multi-lets, which strategy would be the best one? And then I thought, okay, student accommodation might be the best one, because even though the revenue rated over 10 months, but if you've got a room in a property, that room with student accommodation can generate more revenue compared to just a normal tenant. So that's how I then selected student accommodation.
Okay, and as we're getting into the unpacking of student accommodation, I just want to welcome Mohamed Gardee. Hello, sir. How are you? Hello, Mohamed. We do have a bit of an issue with sound regarding Mohamed. However, we can keep it flowing with Kanya. And as you mentioned,
hi guys,
and I
can
think
you hear me now?
There we go. Hello, sir. Welcome
Yes,
to joining us.
There we go. Great. I'm better at property than I am at tech, so.
It's okay. It trumps all of us. Absolutely. So Kanya just finished telling us that he is a seasoned property investor, but also he's a scientist. So I'm hoping like Kanya's going to have a game lodge pretty soon, like another rival Kruger. However, Mohamed, to the viewers, can you just bio of yourself?
Yes, okay. So I've done investment banking. I've worked in property for the last probably 25 years or so. I'm currently based in the Eastern Cape. I'm an investor, and I do lots of consulting work as well.
Okay, fantastic. And this was a question that I had, turned to Kanya. And as I said, and he mentioned something very critical, is that he started off naturally with the historical pattern of property investing, which is you start maybe with a sectional title, possibly like a 1-2 bedroom apartment, and you gradually move on. And that's how he found himself in student accommodation. Would you say your path was the same, or how did you find yourself investing in student accommodation?
Well, so I think it would be similar, but there would be one difference. I think what I do is I've understood that you need to be analyzing the market constantly. You can't wait for opportunities to come to you. You have to be ahead of the curve. And in analyzing, we've found that the risk-reward ratio on student accommodation is far better than any other residential asset. Let me just unpack that quickly. So the rate per room that you get or per bed that you get is quite high. And if you couple that with NSFAS or a bursary, your credit risk becomes quite low. Whereas if you look at other residential assets, which would compete with this, your rental is not so high. You've got a lot of increasing op costs, and you've got credit risk. So here, you're getting more money for less risk. It just makes it a great investment.
Mm-hmm. And so, as you're saying that, I think it was similar to Kanya, you're saying the return on investment ends up being, significantly higher than the standard buy-to-let or things of that model. But, this is a question to the both of you, but I'll start with Kanya. And that is, how do you assess the demand for student housing in a particular area?
Yes, Khali. So how I self-assess the demand in an area is look at how many tertiary institutions or colleges would be located.
Mm-hmm. And you, Mohammed?
Okay, so for me, the demand assessment would be very similar to any other residential asset. There's quite a lot of background and detail that you can do to, Kanya's point. NSFAS funds TVET colleges and universities. You can quickly find out how many there are. There's about 40 universities and quite a few more TVET colleges. You can do a market assessment in each area to figure out, what the demand is. But the easiest way to do the demand is to check on the university's website how many students are registered versus how many beds are in the area and how many beds are provided by the university itself. You'll quickly find that I think 2 years ago there was this idea that there's there's a lot of demand for student accommodation. But we found in certain regions and certain sectors that has actually changed around. The supply has come in, and not every place has, the pent-up demand. There's still a lot of opportunity, but it does become a little more complicated at this stage. You do need to do a lot more assessment and market analysis.
Mm-hmm. So just to remind the viewers, please put any questions you have for Kanya or Mohamed in the chat box, and I'll make sure to read them out to them. In terms of any information you might know or any questions you have regarding student accommodation. However, I think this is also one that is like a general question that people kind of wonder, and that is, if you found that, okay, this area requires student accommodation, like, are there any specific amenities or features you prioritize when selecting student accommodation property? Because we do know that student accommodation properties are significantly different from your standard buy-to-let. So what would be those things that you say?
Yes, Khali. So the things that one would look out for is in terms of volume, where you would look for buildings, so that in a building, instead of a house, in a building you can fit in more students, because you will have more opportunities for more beds. For example, as Mohammed said earlier, let's say in a building you've got 20 apartments. Instead of having 20 tenants, you can literally fit in 2 students per apartment, which means that then your ROI, or the revenue that will be generated by it, will be greater than your normal rentals. Plus, then with student accommodation, you also have to look at things like the Wi-Fi, and also things such as the communal kitchens and communal bathrooms. In other words, how comfortable will the students be once they start moving into the building? Because Wi-Fi is an absolute essential. Plus, you also then look at the distance from that property to the university, because the closer the property is to the institution, then the less worries there will be on your side in terms of transport.
And Mohamed, what is your take on that?
Yeah, so I think Kanya brought up some good points, but I'd like to just summarize into something that's quite important. I think in any business you need to understand what is the product that you are actually selling. What is it that you're bringing to market? So Kanya highlighted quite a few important parts there, on how to maximize the property, and those are exactly what you need to do in your assessment. But at the same time, what I've found has made it very easy to get into this business is a lot of people have been doing what you would call, let's say, maximizing revenue. So they would put in the lowest level of amenities, because there are specific amenities that you need to put in to be in this business. And they would put in the lowest level of those amenities. And it becomes quite easy then to provide a decent, clean product, at a reasonable rental, and it becomes very, very easy to then attract the entire market. So there is quite a lot of analysis to do. You need to understand the kind of student you're getting. It becomes quite difficult as, different regions have different kind of cultures, different things to look at. Kanya highlighted also, you've got shared kitchens, you've got some shared bathroom spaces, etc. You need to manage all those kind of things. You can just put yourself in the shoes of a stranger moving in with you. What kind of things do you need to look at?
And so you mentioned something that I found quite interesting. You said, it can be quite easy, but the big one, and Mohamed, you can answer this first, and then Kanya can answer it after, is the finance. Yes, you can, pardon me, you can start small, but as Kanya had mentioned, if you really want to optimize it, you go for the big buildings, you go for such. So then, another question is, how do you typically finance student accommodation investments, especially because it's such an interesting kind of model? So, Mohamed, you can answer that.
Sure. So the banks have recently gotten their heads around this model. I think 5-6 years ago, it was still a very new thing. Not everybody understood it. A lot of people didn't even know how NSFAS works, or how the bursary market works, or how the cash market works. And it was quite difficult for the banks to do anything on that basis. Now that it's become sort of an established business and an established asset class, as long as you have all the right things in place, and those are the same things you would need for it to be a successful business, it becomes quite easy to finance. There's quite a few banks who are actually on a drive to finance student accommodation. I've also seen some government organizations that have been doing funding as well. So I think the funding part has become much easier now, but the more difficult part is to understand exactly what you're getting into, and if the area is right, and if everything else stacks.
Okay, and Kanya, how do you find yourself typically financing it?
Yes, Khali. Correct. As the asset class student accommodation has become more asked, the banks and institutions are more prepared to finance it. For example, if one focuses on the inner city area, one can approach an institution such as TAF, the Trust for Urban Housing Finance, and then even ABSA themselves. They've now also amended one of their products, the one called Future Rental Income. But with that product, you have to ensure that the property has got the right zoning, or if it's a residential property and you are going to put in students, you have to, and you've got consent from your local municipality, because how the product works, the ABSA Future Rental Income one is that besides assessing your current income, whether it's your salary or your rental income, ABSA then also looks at what is the potential income for that property by getting some data from TPN. And then by having a look at that projected rental income, they then add it also to your affordability. So in my opinion, the likes of TAF and also ABSA and the other banks, they are all now even more willing to finance student accommodation. And before I take up more of your time, another strategy would be that some of the inner cities have got old hotels, which maybe are run down, but the hotels still have like a tourism grading. So what one can do is you can apply to institutions such as F and CIFA, because they've got some tourism, and then you can buy a hotel as it is, and then at a later stage, you can then convert the hotel into a student residence. Yeah.
Oh, wow. Kanya, thank you for that. That is definitely a nugget that I don't think a lot of people had actually looked into. So we're getting a lot of questions in the chat box, but I just have one more question and then we can go to the questions the viewers are asking. And that one is this one. This is a personal one that I've always wanted to know. And that is, what strategies do you employ to mitigate risk associated with student accommodation investments?
Yes. Okay. With student accommodation investments, the big is usually things related to maintenance, because as you mentioned yourself earlier, students can be rowdy. Plus also the fact that as a student accommodation investor, you also need to be responsible for the utilities such as the water and electricity. So some of the things that one can implement is installing like your solar. Yes, it requires more capital, but now also the financial institutions, they are also now coming up with products in order for proper testers to install solar and also like your rainwater harvesting, so that your property can be both energy and efficient. And then you can also just just make sure that the property is properly insured, because with student accommodation there's always obviously risks when it comes to damage.
And Mohamed, what would you say? How do you mitigate risks?
Okay, so I think there's a few ways to mitigate risk. I would do it the same way we do it in any other business or any other property, right? So the first part is to identify the risks that we need to mitigate, understand which risks can be mitigated and which risks need to be accepted. And the risks that you need to be accepted then need to result in a higher return for that risk. Okay, that's the first part that you need to do. So there's quite a few specific risks that come into play in student accommodation. Kanya has highlighted, most of those. There's a lot of things you can do to mitigate that risk. So some of the things, for example, where you've got rowdy students, you don't want students who are throwing parties all the time and damaging your properties and things like that. And the problem with the behavioral aspect of the student is not just what it does to your property, it's what it does to the other tenants in the property. If you have one person who's bringing a bad vibe, I'm not sure how else to say it, but it seems that the current generation is a little bit different from when I was at university. They won't tell the landlord, listen, there's a problem. They'll actually just leave. So you'll end up getting 4 students leaving, and then only you'll realize there's one person who's actually misbehaving. So what I do in my property is we have an extremely strict screening measure. And one of the simple tools that we use on the application form, we actually ask you for your social media handle. And then we go and see what is it you're actually doing. So if you're constantly out drinking and you're constantly out partying, you're actually not going to get a place in our risk. But you see, you have to be agile. You have to understand what are we trying to mitigate against. I think also, most people are very afraid of the water and electricity stuff. I think there was a question, we can answer that when we go to the questions. But the approach to mitigate this risk is to build systems and to ensure that those systems are adhered to all the time.
Okay, so as you mentioned, we are going to the questions now. And the first one that we have is from Samkelo, and he wants to know, are there any kinds of requirements as to what size the room should be to avoid getting into trouble with the law? So Kanya, you can go first.
Good question. Yes, good question, Samkelo. So in order for one to make sure always meeting the standards for NSFAS, the Department of Higher Education, they've got a list of guidelines in terms of what a student accommodation room should be. For example, Mohamed will correct me if I'm wrong, but the minimum size for a single room is, I think it's 14 square meters. So you must always ensure that the amount of students that you are fitting into a room meets the minimum size of the room.
And Mohamed, is that correct?
I think we just have a slight error there. The minimum size for a double room is 14 square meters. Single room, the minimum size is 7 square meters. But what we found is different municipalities do have different planning criteria. It's in Joburg, for example, it's become 8 square meters. In Northwest, 7.5 square meters. I would suggest the following. There's a document that you can actually go and look for. It's called the Minimum Norms and Standard for Student Housing. That's a document that Kanya was referring to, that outlines exactly what you need to do. So that gives you the minimum. And then at the same time, you can actually, take a piece of paper, draw out the size of a room, model what kind of furniture you can fit in there, and you'll see 7 square meters is kind of small. It would be better to offer 9 square meters. You have bigger rooms, a better product, but it's not that much bigger. But yes, the answer is minimum of 8 square meters is what you would need for a single room, 14 square meters for a sharing room.
Okay. And you're right, 7 is very small. Yes. However, these are people that used to ask to go to the bathroom the year before. I don't think they'll mind. The next question is from Esme, and she or he wants to know what's the best place to start when wanting to start a student accommodation as a beginner. So this is brand spanking new. Potentially, maybe you have 2 investment properties that are buy-to-let. So you are venturing brand spanking new into student accommodation. Mohamed, you can start with this one. What would be the best way to start?
Okay, I'll start with a joke. We're not really trying to sell here, but anyway, there is a course that we'll be launching in the next 2 months where I take you through student accommodation in detail and exactly what it entails and the management thereof. But actually, there's simpler ways. I would start by go to some of Property 24 or one of those websites, in an area where student accommodation is being sold. Go and have a look at those houses. Go and see what's available in the market. Do some analysis, do some feasibilities, build your own model to understand what do I need to provide, what's it going to cost me, how does it work, etc. I would say that's the best start. Don't just simply go into, let's buy something with a friend and 4 of us will partner together. I would start with analysis and lots of, homework on it before you do anything.
Okay, and Kanya, what would your advice be for somebody who's starting out brand spanking new?
Yes. So if I was Esme, I would look at firstly which area or which city am I based in, because student accommodation requires a bit of management when you are starting out. So you want the property to be in the same area where you are, assuming that there is a tertiary institution in that area. And then, as Mohamed said, I'll go to platforms such as Property 24, private property, and see which properties are available. And then at the same time, one can also do a pre-approval later to just see how much they would qualify for, and then only look at properties which would fall into that range of their affordability.
Okay, and as we keep the questions going, we have a question from Taki, and he wants to know, do you need to rezone the property when you want to turn it into student accommodation? It's actually a very good question. And how do you manage the utility expenses you deal with when you deal with a lot of tenants? So any one of you can take that first.
Yes.
Okay, I'm happy to take this one. It's something we actually cover when in that course. we basically have 4 things that you need for student accommodation to work with the NSFAS to be a good asset. One of them is the NSFAS accreditation. So if we work backwards, NSFAS accreditation is what you would need, or bursary accreditation. And for that, if you work all the way back, there's a diagram that we share when we do the course, you need the legal use of the land. So you would think of student accommodation actually as a development opportunity, because it doesn't exist in its current form. You need to do things to change it into what's required, right? So one of those is the correct and legal land use. Now, different municipalities have slightly different rules and zoning categories, etc., but they're generally the same. There's 2 types of categories you get. So if you're taking a normal Res 1 property, which is the usual route people go, you buy a house, and then you're converting that as your first deal. So you would say you need to either rezone or you need to get consent use from the municipality. Both processes are similar. So if you had to rezone or do consent use, you would have to fill all the requirements from the municipality for that specific use. And rezoning can take a bit of time. It is a little bit expensive, but I think there is still a lot of scope that can be done. So yes, you would need to rezone or get consent use.
Okay. And, we have another question from Esme, and Kanya, you can take this one. Esme wants to know, what kind of team of experts would you want around when doing a student accommodation? So this is also good. And I think because it's a lot of people, the typical one maintenance guy might not work in this situation. So what would you say in your experience, what kind of team of experts do you need?
Yes. You would need a team of experts, such as guys who are from a management company, who will be able to manage the students on your behalf. So because, as you can imagine, with a student accommodation property, there is likely to be issues maybe on a daily or week. So you'd want to work with a management company, or what some guys do is they will just directly hire a building manager to manage the students themselves, or like a caretaker who would be staying on the property in order to manage the students. And then you'd also want to also link up with your energy experts who would assist you with suggestions as to how to reduce the energy expenses in a student building, and also like the likes of a town and an architect if you want to do a development or a conversion, to ensure that you are compliant, because the town planner is the expert you want to speak to for rezoning, and the architect is the one you want to speak to for designing the building.
Okay, and Kanya, the last question we have is from Zandile, and it's because we had spoken about water harvesting. So, she wants to know, with water harvesting, would that be enough for like a building like student accommodation? And also, what kind of purification system would you be using in that?
Yes, okay. So the rainwater harvesting, it wouldn't be sufficient to meet the water requirements of a student building. You would still want to be connected to the municipality's water supply, but the rainwater harvesting would be sort of a backup system. Or what some guys would do is they would use the rainwater harvesting for the flushing of the toilets, in order to also minimize the water usage in the building. And then at the same time, the purification system you would use would be like something called a filter system, or a technology called reverse osmosis. But usually, just if you speak to the water companies, they usually just have a normal filter system, depending on what kind of how you want the water quality to be.
All righty then. So as we close up, I just want to know, what are your parting words for anybody who wants to get into student accommodation, for the viewers out there? Mohamed, I can start with you.
Yeah, so my parting words will be, this is one of the best asset classes to be in at the moment, but you need to understand the work that it takes, You need to understand there's a lot of research you need to do. There's a lot of systems and things that you need to have in place. I mean, some of it is complex, some of it is not very complex at all. A lot of common sense gets you very far. In the previous question on the electrical stuff and the water kind of things, on one of the properties we've got a borehole, so water is basically almost free there. We've got purification system as well with all those different cartridges, etc. On the electrical side, because this is the fear that people have that students are just going to use up all your electricity. You can't do solar because you need to have a stable load and understand what people bring in and out, and you're never going to catch them with heaters and everything else. It always bypasses you. But we've done some very simple things. So for example, we give you a white plug point in which you can plug your laptop or whatever normal kind of things it is. And the breaker in the box, we link 3 rooms together with a 10 amp breaker. So if you plug anything more than 10 amps in there, that thing cuts, you need to call someone to put the switch back up again, and it becomes an issue. Then we have a different, a different circuit where we use what's called a dedicated plug. It's a red plug, which is smaller than a normal plug. So you actually can't plug anything in. If you want to bring something in, you need to get the caretaker to change your plug head to be able to fit in there. So, I mean, students are relatively lazy. If you put these kind of obstacles in the way, they're not going to really try to solve that problem. It's when it's too easy to get through, that's when you have a problem. So I would say it's a good asset class. You need to do homework. You need to understand what you're getting into. And I think it makes quite a bit of money at this point in time.
Okay. And Kanya, what would your parting words be for somebody starting out in student accommodation?
Yes, I would say it can be worth it. It requires you. You must prepare yourself for managing the property because it does require some management. So let's say you've got a full-time job. You need to always allocate some time to managing the property if you are starting out. And then as you grow, and maybe then you go from residential to commercial buildings. You can then also try to design the buildings in such a way that each room will be like a self-contained apartment. Because one of the risks with student accommodation that people have been speaking about is the fact that what if NSFAS fails, just like the other state-owned companies? Then at least if the building has got rooms that are self-contained, whereby each room has got its own bathroom and its own kitchenette, then you are more flexible as an investor because you can still then rent out the rooms as normal apartments. So that's one way to mitigate your risk. Unlike a building whereby the bathrooms are communal and the kitchens are communal, because those ones wouldn't be that attractive to young professionals. So that's one thing one must take into account as they scale up from residential to commercial.
Okay, thank you so much, gentlemen. I'm sure our viewers got a lot of insight and beautiful nuggets in terms of student accommodations. I want to say again, thank you so much for joining us and have a fantastic afternoon. To the viewers, before I say goodbye, I want to say thank you as always for joining us. But as I said, we have quite a few events happening in the upcoming months, which is January and February. And this is an important one, is that Coffee Chat will now be happening bi-weekly. And the reason for that is so that we can give you phenomenal guests, not that we hadn't before, but we can give you more insight, more depth, and give you experts as the same that we brought you today with Kanya and Mohamed. So we're only going to be having Coffee Chat once every 2 weeks. So the next one will not be next week, but the week after that. So you just start counting from that. However, if you want to know when the next Coffee Chat is going to be happening, or if any of our events are, that's going to be in the events on our website, and that link will be in the chat box. Also, please don't forget to get your tickets for our upcoming workshop. It's a 2-day full workshop. We have very few tickets left, but we still can accommodate a few people, and that's happening this weekend. Alternatively, we're going to be having a preview in Pretoria, and also the dates for that will be in the link in the chat box. From me to you, as always, see you next.